Malaysia has declared a state of emergency to fight the worsening COVID-19 outbreak. The move also tightens Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin's grip on power as he staves off elections for now. Now, the announcement comes as UMNO Supreme Council member Nazri Aziz withdraws support for the ruling Perikatan Nasional coalition. Mr Muhyiddin's government has now lost its majority. In a moment, Melissa Go, live with the latest from Kuala Lumpur. But first, a look at what's happened so far.
King Abdullah Ahmad Shah assented to the government's request for an emergency order in a decree after calling the spread of COVID-19 in Malaysia at a very critical stage. The emergency order will last until 1st August or earlier if the spike in infections comes under control. The King previously rejected Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin's request to declare a state of emergency in October, but the situation has since changed. The country's COVID-19 death toll is climbing rapidly. The healthcare system is reaching its limit. The state of emergency means parliament sittings will be suspended and elections will not be held.
Let me assure you that the civilian government will continue to function. The emergency proclaimed by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong is not a military coup, and curfew will not be enforced.
Lawmakers have criticised Mr Muhyiddin's latest move as being politically motivated, but some residents are hopeful the latest announcement will put a damper on Malaysia's political turmoil.
Different parties are saying different things and wanting to do different things, which can have not a good effect on the whole nation, the citizens as well. I think with the emergency power, I personally feel that things will be a bit more peaceful. Looking forward, more focus on the rakyat, the well-being of the citizens of this country.
Others are upset. The emergency declaration comes just a day after Mr Muhyiddin announced a nationwide travel ban and a 14-day lockdown in the capital Kuala Lumpur and 5 states.
I mean, we were already scrambling how to implement the latest MCO, and now the emergency in place is just more infuriating, I think, for a lot of people, especially, a majority of Malaysians are already affected by MCO, and now there's an emergency as well.
Malaysia's new daily infections hit a record high last week, breaching the 3,000 mark. More than 500 deaths have been logged.
Melissa Go joins live now from Kuala Lumpur. Mel, what are the political implications of this state of emergency?
Well, clearly, number one, Don, there will be no national or state election because the state and the federal constitutions are now suspended after the King invoked the emergency ordinance, giving wide-ranging powers to the executive, to the council, led by Prime Minister Muhyiddin, who's ruling with a razor-thin majority to do everything within his powers to tackle the pandemic that hit another record high today. Daily cases surpassed 3,300. It's the highest. Now, although the Prime Minister has promised an independent committee comprising members from the opposition and health experts to assess the situation from time to time to decide whether the pandemic is brought under control and the state of emergency can be lifted and returned to parliamentary democracy, it's unclear how all this is going to be implemented. What happened in Malaysia and around the world is unprecedented, and already not just the opposition lawmakers, but the government MPs from UMNO, the largest political parties in Mr Muhyiddin's Perikatan Nasional coalition, are crying foul. The emergency declaration, last invoked in 1969, was to quell a race riot, and this is unnecessary. They said it's an abuse of power to help Mr Muhyiddin to stay in power. Now, speaking after a news conference was held in UMNO headquarters to announce his withdrawal of support for Mr Muhyiddin's led government, former Law Minister Nazri Aziz, who's an UMNO MP, accused Mr Muhyiddin of hiding behind COVID-19, behind the palace. Now, he said other UMNO MPs will follow suit. We'll just have to wait and see. While opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim, speaking after chairing an emergency meeting of Pakatan Harapan coalition, claimed that Mr Muhyiddin's government has also fallen. He has lost the majority, he said, because 2 government MPs quit. And now let's listen in to what transpired this afternoon on the political front.
Clearly, you have lost the numbers. You have lost. And morally, ethically, you must tender your resignation, not to resort to emergency.
It is the orang kata apa, the logical action to be taken by Muhyiddin, because it is an admission of defeat that he has lost the majority.
Now, despite the grouses, the fact remains that the country is now under a state of emergency. The king has decreed, and his decision is not questionable in a court of law. No election can be held because Parliament has been suspended. Now, technically, no MPs can even see the king because the palace is under semi-lockdown. Now, having said that, Mr Muhyiddin has promised that he will seek his own mandate and call for an election as soon as the situation has recovered. Now, a lot of trust is placed in him by the people because there's hardly any checks and balance, some worried.
Mel, with political sort of wrangling on hold, what more does this state of emergency entail on top of the movement control order, which was announced earlier this week?
For starters, under the state of emergency, the executive has wide-ranging powers. They can arrest without warrant, conduct cease and search. Prime Minister Muhyiddin said this will empower the armed forces to step up enforcement at the borders to arrest intruders and immigrants that had contributed, he said, to a rise in COVID-19 cases early on in October. Now, secondly, the government can also reach out to the private sector and use their assets and resources of the private hospitals, the private labs, to ease the load of the public healthcare system that's now at breaking point. Now, over 1,000 healthcare workers, the frontliners, have been infected, and the hospital's beds, including those in the ICUs, the intensive care units, are almost full. This will definitely help the health authority to ease the bottleneck, conduct contact tracing and so on. But all this sounds very good on paper. Implementation is another thing altogether, and that's why many Malaysians want to see a concrete action plan from the Prime Minister now that he has all the powers at his disposal. Now, only time will tell. This emergency ordinance expires on August 1st, unless it's lifted earlier. Now, Malaysians here in Kuala Lumpur and across 5 states, including Selangor, Penang, Johor, and Kuala Lumpur, where I am, contributed over 60% of the country's GDP, and it goes into partial lockdown at midnight. Under MCO, the interstate travel is banned except with police permits. Schools are closed. The eateries and the restaurants here, the hawker centres, can open, but only for takeouts. Now, this is absolutely the final night. As far as for people here, they are enjoying their dinner here. At midnight, all these restaurants, all these places, tables will have to be basically, it's only for takeouts only. All the tables will be taken away.
All right, Ray, thanks for getting us up to speed with events in Malaysia. Melissa Go there speaking to us from Kuala Lumpur.